Well, crowds are gathering, as we just showed you, in Charlotte, North Carolina tonight, third night of protests following the fatal police shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. Tonight, protesters are being joined by hundreds of National Guard troops after violence over the last two nights. The Scott family has seen video of the shooting. They say they now have more questions than answers. We'll hear from an attorney for the family in the next hour. Brian Todd is in Charlotte, where protesters are, as we said, are marching and chanting. He joins us now. Brian, explain where you are and what the scene is.
Anderson, we're at the corner of Trade Street and Tryon Street in the uptown area of Charlotte, where a lot of the violence happened last night. A different scene here so far tonight. It's a very spirited crowd of at least 200 people, I'd say, but they just got joined by a crowd that came up Trade Street from down there of, I'd say, about 50 people. So the crowd just got a lot bigger. They're chanting. They're doing a lot of anti-police chants here. They have blocked the intersection of Tryon and Trade Street. Mark, why don't you just take a shot of them? They're jumping up and down now. And a moment ago, Anderson, they were chanting, "Release the video." There's a lot of anti-police sentiment here, and a big reason for that is because they simply do not trust the police's explanation of how Keith Lamont Scott was killed. They want that video released. They were chanting that as they marched a short time ago from a local park. We've been walking with them for at least about, I'd say, a half mile to three-quarters of a mile from that park to this intersection. And they're just blocking the entire intersection right now and chanting.
And Brian, in terms of police presence, National Guard presence, what have you seen?
We have seen police lining the streets, but Anderson, I have to tell you, right now, at least so far from what I've seen tonight, the police presence is not as heavy as we anticipated. They may be kind of laying back a little bit, doing some staging, and just waiting to see how this plays out. We have seen some National Guard on the corners, and we have seen sporadic lines of police, but not the large phalanxes of police that you saw last night, Anderson. So we will see how this plays out, and we'll see where these protesters go and if the tension gets any worse than this. Right now, it's a spirited crowd. It's got a little bit of anger, but it's been very, very peaceful so far.
And is there a sense, Brian, of, oftentimes in a protest, there are people who are kind of directing the protest, have an idea where it's going to go, or kind of monitoring it? Is there that level of kind of centralized organization, or is it more done over social media and people are just kind of joining and figuring out where to go?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, Anderson. There have been a couple of people who I've identified as, I think, being organizers of this march. There was a young lady who's kind of been directing them on where to go, and she was the one who actually directed them to stop in this intersection. When I asked her where they were going, she didn't want to tell me. She said, "Follow us and you'll see where we're going." Maybe she didn't know, maybe she did. But I would say it's lightly organized at this point.
It seems like some protesters have, I don't know if it's full-on gas masks, but apparatuses to put over their mouths, I guess, if there is gas.
Yeah, there are. There are several of them. They have bandanas. They have masks. I think they're just ready for anything. They saw how bad this got last night. Many of them were probably out here, and they're just, they're ready. And the police seem to be ready too. But again, I have not seen a massive police presence. I get the sense, Anderson, that the police are just kind of hanging back a little bit.
Yeah, oftentimes in a situation like this, police want to kind of hang back, don't want to have such a big visual presence because they don't want to kind of accelerate things or make things any worse and provoke confrontations. They'll kind of wait and see where things are going, which I think we saw some of that last night, Brian. It certainly seemed last night that there were small numbers of police initially, at least, and then we saw larger groups of police arriving as the violence got worse.
Yes, that's right. We did see that last night, Anderson. And my producer, Greg Clary, just told me, I cannot see this, but he told me, what, Greg, a busload of police just arrived?
Down there. That's from Kevin Conlon down there.
Okay, yeah, we got my producer, Greg Clary, saw a busload of police arrive a few yards down the street from us. And again, that's not unusual in a situation like this. It doesn't signify anything menacing at this point. They're laying back and they're just getting ready to see what this crowd does.
Yeah. Have you seen businesses? Are they boarded up, given what happened certainly over the last two nights?
We have seen businesses boarded up, and we have seen, it's interesting, the mayor, Jennifer Roberts, said earlier today that this town is open for business, and it's going to be business as usual. Well, we also heard just before that Bank of America and Wells Fargo and a couple of other major companies told their employees, their non-essentials, to stay home. So it's not quite open for business, and this town seemed a little bit more sparsely populated today than it is on a normal day. And I'll tell you another thing, that we did a couple of live shots earlier at the Hyatt House Hotel down the street from here. That hotel suffered a lot of window damage last night, and 2 of its employees were assaulted. What we saw down there a short time ago was they were removing some of the windows that were not damaged and putting plywood in their place. So they were really, just gearing up in anticipation of this night. Other businesses were not doing that, but, that business had really got hit hard last night. So you have kind of a combination of things. There's just, there is a lot of tension, and there's a lot of anxiety here tonight. So far, this is the extent of what you're seeing as far as the real passion and energy in the streets.
Brian, I'm not sure if you've been able to see this or not. The National Guard troops who are on the streets, are they actually armed? Because I remember I believe it was in Ferguson, when National Guard troops were brought in, they were really kept sort of in staging areas to kind of help with logistics. They weren't necessarily patrolling on the streets. But Boris Sanchez was saying he had seen some, I think, on street corners. Have you, and are they actually armed?
We did see some National Guardsmen who were armed. We also saw others who were either not armed or were very lightly armed. I personally saw one National Guardsman with a rifle. So, again, I did not see a huge presence of them. They are on the odd corner, but they're not on every corner downtown. And as far as how heavily they're armed, it seems to vary, Anderson. And the crowd, as you can see, is now on the move. We are going down Trade Street past Tryon Street. Getting my bearings here, I believe we're heading east, but Brian, we don't know where exactly this crowd is going.
We were just showing with our viewers, we're showing your camera on the left-hand side of the screen. On the right-hand side of your screen is a different vantage point, a different camera, though near where you are, several lines of police officers in riot gear, just standing by, waiting, some folks taking pictures of them. But again, that's in a separate area nearby to where you are. Boris Sanchez, I wanted to go to you. Yes. You're where the police officers are. What is the scene there? Because you're not too far from where Brian is.
We are literally a couple hundred feet away from where Brian is. There is a large contingent of police, as you can see in front of me, decked out in riot gear. There are people here, as you said, taking pictures of them and yelling things at them. I want you to turn around and take a quick look behind us, because this is the crowd that Brian was just talking about. There was a large circle of people that blocked traffic in the middle of the street. This is down the street from the Omni Hotel. They were chanting slogans. There were people with blowhorns that were yelling out into the crowd. And they are, again, mostly peaceful. They're starting to move away from the Omni Hotel in a different direction than we were yesterday in downtown. So far, police have not really done much. They've been non-responsive. They're just standing and watching. Right now they're chanting, "Can't stop the revolution." And as you can tell, it's a mixed crowd. There's quite a few people. I would say that right now there's a couple hundred people. I can't say it's more than 200, but definitely more than 100. I'm going to swing back over to the police, who are not moving, but some people in the crowd are now walking toward the police and confronting them. So things could get dicey shortly. If things get out of hand and agitators, start throwing things like they did yesterday. So far, though, things are mostly peaceful. There is a buffer space between police and the protesters. Just down the street from us, I heard you ask my colleague Brian Todd earlier if we saw a National Guard. There was actually very heavily armed National Guard right outside the Omni Hotel with a large armed vehicle. So they are not far from this area, clearly ready to move at a moment's notice. And again, we're just go ahead, Anderson.
Yeah, Boris, one of the difficult things I imagine for police officers here is if this protest is just kind of fluid and there's not, a preordained path or route that they're going to take, the question is, are officers kind of following along as we sometimes see in various protests? We saw that in New York City. I remember when protesters took over the West Side Highway. Police were kind of following along trying not to intervene, but just sort of, keeping abreast with protesters. Is that the scene here, or are they allowing people to just kind of walk where they will and try to pre-assemble people at various junctures?
This is very, very disorganized, Anderson. In this case, it was the protesters that approached the police. The police have just been standing kind of at the corner of this building lined up. They had not made any kind of formation or started mobilizing. It was mostly protesters that were trying to walk down the street. Many of them are still walking down the street, but many of them came right up here to this line where we see several people now trying to get protesters to back up. It sounds like they're yelling, "Release the tapes." Yeah, and so right now it doesn't look like police are responding to them, but it is a precarious situation. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera.
Brian, Boris, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. Brian, what's the situation where you are?
Well, Anderson, we've got a crowd of people confronting riot police, but they're just really getting in their face and yelling and pointing at them. My photojournalist Mark Biello can come up here, and we're behind a line of people doing that. Sorry, just pointing it over here. You can maybe see the tops of the riot police helmets right here, or maybe you can't. It's quite a scrum around here.
Right.
But they're really just pointing at them, yelling at them. There are a couple of community activists who are kind of getting between them and the police just to kind of make sure that things maybe don't get out of hand. But you can now see a little bit of anger boiling over here.
I actually want to go back to Boris Sanchez, because he actually, I think, has the vantage point on the same scene, just from the other side, and slightly better. Boris, we did see last night a number of people sort of standing between police and some of the more violent protesters, or people sort of trying to get a confrontation with police, trying to keep the two sides apart. We're seeing that again here now. I see somebody, looks like a pastor, and some others who are clearly trying to keep the two apart.
That's right, Anderson. Actually, one of them... we just got word from police. They started speaking over a loudspeaker. They're declaring this an unlawful assembly, so they're forcing people out and saying that, they'll get them out of here with the use of force. As you mentioned, there have been repeatedly people that have gotten in between police and the protesters, trying to keep the situation calm, trying to keep the protesters peaceful. One of them, Toussaint Romain, he's a public defender. He was actually right there, right now, in between protesters and police. He was speaking to me yesterday, and he was hit with tear gas several times, but he kept going back, trying to keep people from getting arrested. He told me that he's doing this because there are no leaders in this community that are stepping up for those that feel that the justice system doesn't represent them. So he is trying to make sure that the voice that's coming from the community is one of emotion, but certainly one of peace, and one that doesn't. One second. And it's a voice that certainly doesn't miss the message that they're trying to get across and damper that message with violence. And we're still hearing that megaphone. They're basically telling people to leave right now. Some people have left, but the crowd in front of the police is still sizable, Anderson.
Yeah, and Boris, on the left-hand side, we're showing your camera. On the right-hand side of our screen, we're showing a helicopter shot of a fair number of people. Is that the group that was in the intersection before and has moved on? Do you know, Boris? I know you're static in your spot, so you may not be able to tell. But it looks like well over 100, I would think, people. It's unclear to me where they are going.
Yeah, I would say that most of the people that were in the middle of the intersection in that circle have moved on. I can't tell you precisely where they moved on, but they've gone down Turin Street. And they're further down. They don't. I mean, it doesn't compare to the crowd. The circle doesn't compare to the crowd that's in front of the police doesn't compare to the number of people that were in that circle. That was, well over 100 people, maybe 200. Here, I would say there's 60, maybe 70 people, and a lot of media, obviously, standing in the way as well. So it is a big crowd, but it's not nearly the size that we saw before. I'm not sure where those other folks went. They may have just dispersed after getting that message from police.
Well, we're certainly seeing...
I'm going to try to track them down.
We're certainly seeing them, I think, on the right-hand side of your screen on a helicopter shot. I think they've probably just gone a couple blocks from where they were. We're going to take a short break. Boris Sanchez, Brian Todd, be careful out there. We're going to check back with both throughout the evening. Coming up, another city grappling with a fatal police shooting. We'll have the latest from Tulsa, where an officer has been charged with manslaughter.
Listen, they are not... I'm just talking to the people.
Well, we're covering the breaking news from Charlotte tonight. A third night of protests underway. So far, we haven't seen the violence of the last two nights. Let's check in with Boris Sanchez. And Boris, we're showing that helicopter shot of the large groups of people moving down the street. Where are you now, and what are you seeing? I don't think we have Boris yet. I want to bring in retired NYPD Lieutenant Darren Porcher, who is watching this along with us. Darren, this has got to be, I mean, for police, an extremely, because it's such a fluid protest, and at this point peaceful, thankfully, it's still got to be a big challenge for police just trying to figure out where they're going and how to respond to that.
Absolutely, but the key is the deployment of personnel. When we look back at what happened in Baltimore in connection with the Freddie Gay case, that was a teachable moment for law enforcement on a national level. So one of the things that we have to take in consideration is how will law enforcement deploy their resources? The first thing, the National Guard. If you notice on television, you don't see any of the National Guard troops. The National Guard troops are being positioned in the commercial areas, high real estate areas, so to speak, to prevent things like looting, which occurred in Baltimore. When you think the state police are now being held in what we refer to as reserve, and that reserve is going to be called upon if necessary by the local PD. The incident commander in this particular case is going to be the chief of police for the Charlotte Police Department. That chief of police is the shot caller, so to speak. He's going to direct and deploy resources accordingly. He's already been given that position by the governor. Now, when we look at how this band is moving around, so to speak, the Charlotte Police Department has a list of agitators. A lot of these agitators are people that come from out of town to quote-unquote stir up the pot. So if we have an issue with one of these agitators, it will be the local police department, the Charlotte Police Department, that would assess and extract those individuals as deemed necessary. But once again, as you mentioned, Anderson, we do have a fluid situation. But however, when we look at the totality in personnel, we have an overwhelmingly larger number of police and law enforcement officials as opposed to the 100+ people that we have as demonstrators.
And Lieutenant Porcher, when, we have seen increasingly, we saw it last night again, that technique of there's police lines, and then a small group of police, 3 or 4, will quickly run out, grab somebody who they believe is, an agitator or causing trouble, and bring that person through the lines again and arrest that person. Is that an effective tactic?
It's very effective because the leaders in many of these instances are the agitators. So when you remove these quote-unquote rebel rousers, the rest of the crowd is not going to be as apt to join in. A lot of the people that come to participate in these protests are law-abiding citizens that are exercising their constitutionally afforded rights. So the small component of what we refer to as agitators are the people that the local PD, as I refer to as the Charlotte PD, those are the individuals that these agitators, that's who we're going to focus on, because the majority of these people that come to protest are good people.
Now, Boris Sanchez is there. Now, Boris, we're looking at your camera. Basically, a small group of police seem to have formed a circle or a square and are just kind of standing by. Are there a lot of people around them?
They are standing by. They are standing by. So the biggest part of the crowd has actually moved down the street to a local park, but this is where the encounter with police and protesters was most heated. They actually moved from that corner of the building into this area, partly, I think, because it was getting kind of dangerous. There were people on all sides of police, and they were cornered. Now they're moving out. There are still protesters behind me and across the street as well. We don't know exactly where they're headed. This is, I believe, south of where the park is. The park is directly to our east, so I don't know if they're circling the block or they're just doing this to get out of the way for now. But again, so far, a very heated argument, nothing violent yet. There were calls for the crowds to be dispersed from loudspeakers from police. Some of the crowd did disperse, but from what I understand, of that big circle of people that was blocking the intersection for quite some time has moved down to a park a short distance from us. I'm not sure if that's where we're heading now. I'm going to try to find out, Anderson.
All right. And Lieutenant Porcher is still with us. Darren, in a case like this, you have a lot of people yelling things at police officers, engaging with the police officers, or trying to engage with them. Is it is that part of the training for the police to just not respond, or do they want police talking to people, or how do they handle that?
Well, each case is different. As I mentioned earlier, what happened in Baltimore in connection with the Freddie Gay case, that was a teachable moment for law enforcement on a national level. We don't want the protesters to begin destroying property. Therefore, the incident commander here, which is the chief of police of the Charlotte Police Department, he has guidelines. I shouldn't say guidelines, but he has a focus, and that's going to be predicated on the actions of these protesters. But primarily, the goal is to preserve human life and property. Because if we let the people just continue to riot, the thing will just it'll spiral out of control. So we want to snip this in the bud as quick as possible. And that's what I see that's happening here today. It seems to be an effective strategy because we don't have the public disobedience that we had over the last 2 days.
It's a dangerous situation for police, though. I mean,
Absolutely.
As we know, last night, one of the people at the protest was shot not by police, but by
another
somebody
protester
else in the crowd. So at least one person in that case seemed to have a gun.
Right. In addition to that, we've had correspondents that have been injured by protesters as well. So it's a very dangerous, active, and fluid situation. Therefore, it's incumbent upon the police that they practice quintessential law enforcement tactics to preserve life and property of all parties involved.
I think we also have David Klinger standing by, former LAPD officer and also criminologist. David, just as you watch this, as we're seeing it tonight, I mean, obviously, it wasn't really until, well, frankly, about this time last night that we started to see some violence. That was the incident outside the Omni Hotel. So far tonight, thankfully, it seems to be much more controlled, more orderly. It looks like from the overhead shot that I'm seeing right now, it looks like maybe 100 or more, hard to estimate given the light. People, they were in an intersection. Now it seems like they're moving on, but certainly an organized police presence.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand that one of the things that may be going on is with the addition of the National Guard troops, what that does is that frees up more police assets. Typically, the National Guard will serve in basically a perimeter position, take that role away from police officers, so then more police officers can be brought online. And so that might be part of why there is a bigger show of force that is having that effect of calming things. And as your other guest was talking about, if they are making targeted arrests, riots are very emotional. And if leadership is taken away, oftentimes that does calm the emotion. And so if that's what's going on the ground in Charlotte, I would expect that there would be an outcome that would not be as violent as last night's situation.
Even though the initial, grabbing the person, arrest of the person may anger the people around, it has the effect, I mean, it's a proven tactic, you're saying, that it has the effect of kind of dissipating protest.
That's all the evidence that I'm aware of, absolutely. And not just the leaders, but if someone is involved in some type of criminal activity and the squad leader or the sergeant or whoever they've got backing the lineup says, go get that guy, he committed a crime, well, then what happens is immediately the visual for everybody else who's there is, oh, they are arresting people now who are committing crimes, so we're not going to commit crimes. So two ways that works as a positive in terms of taking people out of there. And certainly some members of the protest group are going to be upset, but because the leadership's taken away and people who are committing crimes are taken away, that does tend to let the air out.
David, in the riots I've been in over the years, my belief as a reporter was always if your camera is affecting the situation anyway, if people are in some way behaving differently because you're pointing a camera at them, it's beholden on you as a journalist to not be pointing the camera, to move away so you're not kind of altering the situation. But now you have a situation where everybody has a camera and there's a lot of folks who want to document some sort of a confrontation, not necessarily professionals, but just people who are part of it. They want that. I mean, that again adds another layer to this.
Absolutely. And talking to friends of mine who are still on the job, one of the things that they relate is that oftentimes in a typical traffic stop or response to a dispute at a business or something, the cell phones come out and the cell phone recording people are trying to egg on the citizens to try to create something so they can get a YouTube moment or maybe even egg on the police. And so absolutely we have this reactive effect. And that is a challenge. That is a problem. This is something that is new. This is something that law enforcement doesn't really know how to manage in terms of what can we do to try to mute some of that. But remember, the police aren't in control of everything. If the police were in control of everything, there wouldn't be a riot in the first place. So the police need to figure out ways to leverage the assets that they have, work with their assets, work with assets in the community. You mentioned that there's one gentleman who apparently is going around trying to calm people down, try to identify other people that are interested in playing that role, see if we can make it happen.
We're going to take another short break. We'll have a lot more from Charlotte and the latest from Tulsa as well coming up. The third night of protests underway in Charlotte, North Carolina after the fatal police shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. There's police video of the shooting. The family has seen it. The police chief says the public will not. Joining me now is two former federal prosecutors, senior legal analyst Laura Coates and senior legal analyst as well, Jeffrey Toobin. Laura, does it make sense to you that the police would not release the video? I talked to one former LAPD officer earlier who said essentially you don't want to do anything that's going to taint any witnesses.
I think that's pretty disingenuous. One of the reasons they don't want to release the footage is certainly they want to be able to ensure that they have all their bases covered to figure out if there was indeed a use of excessive force. But also the elephant in the room, Anderson, there is a law that's set to go in effect in North Carolina in a few days that would prevent the police from ever releasing footage without a court order. So it may be an instance of trying to bide their time in order to, one, put all their ducks in a row, and two, to have that law take effect.
Jeff, we've certainly seen cases where the video has told the whole story. I mean, in this case, the family says they now have more, having seen the video, they have more questions than but I think back to the other case where, you know, the police said one thing has happened and the video came out and that was shot by a bystander. It showed the guy running away and the officer shooting him and apparently looking like planting some sort of evidence.
Right, that's Chicago. I mean, Rahm Emanuel almost lost his entire mayoralty because the Chicago police did not release the video until after the election when Rahm Emanuel was reelected. You know, the idea behind not releasing the video is that witnesses will see the video and then change their testimony to line up with the video. You know, that is sometimes the case, but there are countervailing reasons. It is not an ironclad rule that you never release a video. And I think here, where there were a limited number of witnesses around this shooting, presumably all of them have been spoken to already, and now there's a tremendous public interest in seeing what happened here, and it might serve to calm the community, to let people see that it was perhaps an ambiguous situation. But I just think when the public interest is so strong to see a video, the police should release it.
Laura, we now also have in Tulsa a situation where the police officer has been charged with manslaughter. Given what we know, does that seem reasonable to you?
You know, it does. Think about what is the big contrast between what's happening in Charlotte versus what's happening in Tulsa. Remember, Tulsa is a community that just a few months ago, they had a conviction of a volunteer deputy on a manslaughter charge for his use of a handgun as opposed to a taser. And manslaughter carries a penalty of at least 4 years. And the reason it's manslaughter versus homicide is because I think the prosecutor believes, as probably the community does, that this officer did not go out intending to commit a homicide, but in fact acted out of an unreasonable level of passion or an unreasonable level of fear that the other officers did not have because they chose a taser. So I think in that instance it's probably appropriate, but it's really important to note that there's a contrast between the peaceful protests in Tulsa because of the confidence you have in previously successful prosecutions of officers versus Charlotte, where you have a recent case where you had a hung jury for the death of an unarmed black man by an officer.
I think it's also true that Tulsa is just a lot more conservative community than Charlotte is. And it is a confident step on the part of the prosecutor to file these manslaughter charges so quickly. These cases are hard to make against police officers. You know, the question in this case is reasonableness. Did the officer behave reasonably? Juries are sympathetic to officers when they say they were in fear for their lives. Here we have a situation where the victim, was near a car And it'll be an interesting question about whether the judge allows in evidence the fact that there was PCP, which is a drug that can make people erratic and violent, inside the car. Now, the officer had no way of knowing there was PCP in the car,
right.
But if the jury hears that, that may help the officer a great deal.
Well, we also don't know whether it was in his system, right, Jeff? And so we have a number of issues with that.
Right.
And, you know, but it's true that that officers do get a lot of deference from both the jury pool and the greater community. But remember that in Tulsa, one officer pulled a taser, one officer shot and killed. And so you have that reasonable officer standard obliterated.
Yeah. Laura Coates, it's great to have you on. Jeff Toobin always as well. Much more ahead when we continue. We're following those protests out of Charlotte, the latest developments from Charlotte. We're also going to hear from an attorney for the family of Keith Lamont Scott about what they saw in that video and the way they interpret it. Thanks for joining us for the second hour of 360. We begin tonight with breaking news in Charlotte, North Carolina. Protesters on the move marching what so far has seemed to be an entirely peaceful demonstration, a much different scene than, of course, at this time last night. A short time ago, we learned a man who was shot during protests last night by another person in the crowd has died. He wasn't shot by police. In a moment, I'll speak with someone who was there, saw the whole thing, tried to help the man after he was shot. That happened on the second night of protests after the fatal police shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. Tonight, hundreds of National Guard troops are in Charlotte trying to prevent a third night of violence, along with numerous police officers. Brian Todd joins me again with the latest on the ground. So, Brian, we have seen crowds of people now moving on the move. Where are you? What are you seeing?
Well, Anderson, we just we're with a crowd that is moving, I believe, north on South College Street here. And if you can see behind me, they were, by my count, blocked probably 4 intersections at least. And they were doing some street chanting back here. It was interesting, a moment ago, there was kind of a blockage of this intersection by a couple of police cars. As these protesters started to come toward the police cars cleared the way for them to come through. So the police are willing to let these people march and to peacefully assemble. We saw a couple of angry confrontations between protesters and riot police earlier, but it did not get violent. Now this, if you see this, Mark, this poor motorist is in the middle here and kind of caught. They're letting her go, but they're getting a little bit agitated. They just want her to get out of the way, basically. And she is moving out of the way, so they want to keep moving.
And Brian, tonight's the first night the National Guard has been ordered in place. How's the balance between police and National Guard presence?
We've seen a heavier police presence, Anderson. We were just with a large line of riot police as they circled a few blocks. I know Boris was doing some reporting on that as well. We were with them. And then the riot police all went into the Marriott City Center Hotel to basically take a breather. Now, that was that group of police, but there are other police out here. To answer your question, the police seem to outnumber the National Guardsmen. We only see a few National Guardsmen on an odd corner of the city, not on every corner. So the National Guard presence right now, at least visibly, is not that strong. The police have a much heavier presence here. And you can see the crowd behind me chanting. We've seen a whole lot of kind of different variations of protest here. It's been very interesting, Anderson. We've seen street debates between people, street chants, singing. We saw some angry but peaceful confrontations between protesters and riot police where they kind of stared each other down and the protesters yelled and pointed at them. But so far, Anderson, very, very peaceful, very spirited here tonight.
Brian Todd, we're going to check back with you shortly. As we've been reporting, the family of Keith Lamont Scott has seen the police video of him being shot and killed. Joining me now, an attorney for the family, Justin Bamberg. Justin, thanks very much for being with us. I know the family watched the videos today at the Charlotte Police Headquarters. You saw them as well. What was their reaction to seeing them?
Quite frankly, it was very painful. Not just to see him shot and killed, but to see the reactions on the rest of the family members' face. I do want to point out that this was actually the second time his wife has seen the shooting because she was out there the day that her husband was shot and killed.
Did she actually witness the shooting, the initial shooting, or did she see the aftermath?
No, she witnessed the initial shooting, Anderson.
So the Charlotte police chief said that after he reviewed the video of the shooting, that it did not give him, and I quote, absolute definitive visual evidence that will confirm a person was pointing a gun. Does that square with what you saw in the video, what the family says they saw?
What I saw in the video is that he did not point a gun. There's no question about that. at least based on the 2 videos that we witnessed today.
Do you see a gun in any of the videos?
No, absolutely not. What you see, Anderson, is you see officers yelling commands. You see Mr. Scott step out of the vehicle. His hands are down by his side. He is acting calm. He's acting in a very non-aggressive manner. He looks to be confused, to be quite honest. You do see something in his hand, but it's impossible to make out from the video what it is. I do know that at the moment that he was shot, he actually appeared to be stepping backwards.
Did he own a gun? Did he have a gun? I mean, it is an open carry state, so did he have a gun on him?
No, it's my understanding, and based on talking with the family, that he did not have a gun, that he didn't own one, and he did not habitually carry one with him, to use the lingo that was asked of me earlier today.
So after seeing the videos, is the family still standing by the fact that Keith Lamont Scott, point blank, did not have a gun in the car and only had a book?
The family, of course, their position and their understanding is that he did not have a gun. But here's the thing, Anderson. We have law enforcement saying that they recovered a gun from the scene. There are multiple witnesses that say that he didn't have a gun. At the end of the day, we don't create the facts. This is just about getting down to the bottom of what happened and why it happened. So we look forward to the rest of the investigation panning out. And quite frankly, I think that and the family's position is that these videos that we watched today, body camera footage as well as a dash cam capturing the shooting, should be made available to the public, allow people to see it, and allow people to draw some of their own conclusions based on what they see with their own eyes.
And that's certainly something we've heard from protesters tonight who are chanting about, in part, releasing videos. I talked to one law enforcement personnel, formerly with the LAPD, and a criminologist, who said one argument against releasing a video like this, at least at this stage, is you don't want to influence any potential witnesses who are out there who might see the video and, be affected by it in terms of what they actually believe they saw or say they saw. What do you make of that argument?
I understand that position, but quite frankly, Anderson, this is 2016. By the time something happens, any potential influence over potential witnesses is going to happen via social media, via things like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I think that when we look around what's happening in Charlotte, and the reason you hear helicopters flying above head is because people want answers. This family deserves answers. Again, we don't create the facts. We live with the cards that we're dealt, but we can't be in the game unless we're given the cards. So I understand his position, but quite frankly, I think the videos do need to be released. I do want to say, and the family does appreciate having had the opportunity to review them first, but at this point, the video should be made public.
Justin Bamberg, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I want to check in with with Boris Sanchez, who is with the protesters. Boris, where are you and who are you with?
Hey, Anderson, we're actually here with Toussaint Romain. He's that public defender that I was telling you about earlier, who was standing between police and protesters last night in the face of tear gas and people pushing and shoving. You're back here tonight. What brought you back?
Same thing, man. Just doing my part. We all have a 9 to 5. We all have a purpose. We all have a calling. I'm just fulfilling mine. That's why I'm here tonight.
When you see how last night unfolded and how many people got into trouble, how much property was destroyed, how does it compare to what's going on right now? It looks relatively peaceful.
When I went home last night, I kissed my kids. I told them I loved them because I didn't know if I was going to make it home last night. But I have hope that we got to make it better. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. This protest right now is much better. The clergy is here. Adults are here. Black and white. There's been not one incident of violence so far. Yeah, the National Guard is here, but they're nowhere around us at the moment. State Highway Patrol, they're here. State of emergency we've been declared in. Look how peaceful this is. This is what happens when leaders show up. And this is what happens when we come together as a nation. Because again, Boris, you have to realize, man, we're in this together. And I have to come back every day, and I'll come back every day, and I'll come back each day after that until we make sure that we make it better for my kids, if you have kids, for yours, and just for our nation. We have to get better. And I have every hope and every reason to believe we will.
Now, there were a lot of questions about this video. Do you feel like this crowd would be perhaps less agitated, perhaps less aggressive if that video was released? The police say that it would hinder the investigation. From your perspective, how would the protesters feel about that aspect of this if the tape was released? Would this stop?
You know, Boris, I was out here last year, August 15th, with protesters after the Jonathan Ferrell case, right? I was out here keeping the peace just like I am today. This is not just something we showed up to do. What happened in that last case was simply this. The police acted immediately. They had full disclosure. They fired him. They proceeded with an indictment. They may have had it done a second time, but then they let the criminal justice process run its course. He actually went to trial. The verdict was what it was, but the process went. And I think if we allow the process to work the way it's supposed to, people aren't unhappy. It's when we don't indict. It's when we do cover up. And the police have a history of doing this type of thing, especially with lies like this that we're talking about. So in all candor, disclosing the video would only allow more peace to be brought to this process, because a year ago, or actually 2 years ago, when the actual shooting happened of Jonathan Ferrell, the police acted. The criminal justice system acted, and you didn't see any of this.
Toussaint, you're a public defender. You're obviously a community leader. I've seen people come up to you and thank you for what you did last night. Do you think it's going to turn out the same? Do you think we're going to see that violent contingent of protesters erupt again?
Well, man, I'm no hero. I'm no leader. So that part I'll disagree with you. And I guess I got to disagree with the other side, too. We're out here doing it peacefully, man. So, I mean, right now you have a lot of the adults and leaders and clergy and just folks in general who are out here, and they're doing it peacefully. They're holding hands, they're chanting, they're exercising their constitutional rights, they're saying and screaming, and they're basically doing what they're allowed to do. I'm surprised more of America isn't outraged by them doing it the right way. It's kind of a weird way of saying that, but they are doing it the right way. When we don't stand for a flag, there's a lot of issues. And Colin Kaepernick, shout out to you. But for the most part, right now, these folks are doing it in a way that's proper. There is no violence. Will there be violence later on? I don't know, but I'll stay and find out. And like you, hopefully we'll keep the peace. Like the other adults who are here and the folks wanting to do the right thing, we'll do the right thing. And we have to, because we have tomorrow. We have a day after that, and we got to end up doing it the right way.
Toussaint, I have to respectfully disagree with you. The way people have approached you and the way people were approaching you last night, you certainly are a leader in this community. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We appreciate it. Anderson, we'll keep following this crowd right now. We'll send it back to you.
Should also point out, Boris, and our thanks to Sam Remain, public defenders are underfunded, overworked, and underappreciated in this country. And for him to work all day and then come out at night to try to keep the peace in a protest like that is an extraordinary gesture. So please thank him. With me again is Georgetown University sociology professor Michael Eric Dyson, former LAPD officer David Klinger, and retired NYPD Lieutenant Darren Porcher. Professor Dyson, I mean, I just, when you see that public defender out there keeping the peace between protesters and police, that's awesome citizenship.
It's heartwarming. And it's the best of our masculinity as black men. It's the best of our humanity as black people. It's the best of our nation as citizens. And see, this is what angers so many African American and Latino people and poor people, is that there are so many more of him than there are of people who would instigate or start trouble. And yet their humanity is not respected. That young man that we are celebrating, that young man upon whom the camera is trained, that young man who exhibits such profound humanity is like so many millions more of us out there, and yet at any moment they may be subject to the arbitrary will of a police person who with one blow, with one shot, with one bullet, can end a life. And this is why it's so necessary for us to talk about this. Now, we can train our cameras on the people who are out there now, whether they are violent or not. The reality is they are reacting to years of congestion, years of inability to be heard. Martin Luther King Jr. said that a riot is the language of the unheard. And these uprisings and rebellions and protests and people coming together peacefully are the manifestation of a long simmering outrage at the inability to get America to treat us with fundamental respect and decency. So what that young man exhibits is what so many millions more have, and they want that to be respected from the get-go.
And former NYPD Lieutenant Darren Porcher. Darren, just in terms of what you have seen tonight up to this point, because I think at this point last night we had already seen about 20 minutes at least of tear gas and violence. I think at this point last night someone had been shot, was in critical condition. Unclear the details of it at that point last night, but now we know that person has died, shot by somebody else in the crowd. What do you see of what you're seeing tonight? And how important, Darren, do you think the release of a video might be just in not only in the investigation or damaging to the investigation, but how important to bringing calm?
Okay, well, there are two components. The first piece, in terms of what I'm witnessing, I see a masterful utilization of resources from the perspective of the police department. What that police department did was they connected with a lot of the major stakeholders in these communities and the community leaders, and they utilized them as buffers. And we saw that in the earlier part of the video, where we saw a lot of the community leaders forming a human chain, so to speak, between the police and the protesters. I thought that was a masterful way of utilizing those resources in the community.
Hey, Darren, let me just jump in here. I just want to go to our Brian Todd. Brian, what's the scene where you are? Because this is the first time we're actually seeing, I think, National Guard troops.
Anderson, we have just seen them come up the steps of, I believe, a government building here. I'm told that this is one of the jail. It's one of the jail buildings, and they're confronting National Guardsmen who are standing by the door. This was a very, very spur-of-the-moment decision. They were marching down the street, and they just kind of rushed up here to confront these National Guardsmen. But again, there are community activists here. You can see this, trying to steer them back down the stairs and back down the street, and that is where they are now going. They are kind of peeling back and coming back down the stairs, but it looked to be a pretty heated moment there for a minute. There was when they were rushing up the stairs here and confronting the National Guardsmen. But now they are peeling back. They are going back down the stairs and proceeding. And this was really at the urging of a couple of community activists. This is the interesting part of this dynamic. There were a couple of activists here who really got between them and the National Guardsmen and told them, get away from here. I'm not sure exactly what they said to them to convince them to do it, but they were very effective in getting these protesters to come back down the stairs here and go back up the street. And we're walking with them back up the street now.
We'll continue to check in with you. And Darren, I'm sorry for interrupting. It's one of those situations when you look at those National Guard folks, it looks like at least those men there do not have riot shields. They are standing basically in front of that building to permit, which, as I think it was David Klinger pointing out, that because of the National Guard, it frees up police resources to be in more forward positions, and yet it's a dangerous position for National Guard troops because wherever they are, they can be confronted, as we just saw.
Right. Well, the National Guard troops are at somewhat of a disadvantage. A soldier is not a police officer. So we have two separate and distinct missions. The National Guard troops are primarily there for hardening more so than anything else. And the jail is the last place that people are going to be able to break into. But Anderson, you asked me a question in connection with the video earlier, and I just wanted to answer that. In connection with that video, I think it's of optimum importance, and it's essential that that video is released, because where this incident happened, it was not a constitutionally protected place. It happened in a public lot of a housing development. Therefore, people had access or a line of vision to see what did occur. When we think about the average individuals in a place like New York City, for example, we're videoed roughly 100 to 200 times a day. So we as the public don't have an expectation of privacy when walking in the street. So when we take in consideration a parking lot in this encounter, it's something that the public had a line of sight to. Therefore, by all means, the police department needs to introduce that video to the public, because it's the fear of the unknown with this public that is being riled up about. And just take in consideration what the attorney stated. The attorney states that he never saw a gun. We have officers that stated that they did see a gun. Now we have a public that has to pick a side as to what they believe and what they don't believe. And not to say that the video would be completely inclusive, but it would quell a lot of the anger and hostility in these communities.
And yet, David, I think it was you earlier on who pointed out the flip side of that, which is protecting the investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. The integrity of the investigation is vital, and my argument is not that the video shouldn't be released. It's simply a question of timing. I want to make sure that every relevant witness has been interviewed And if they need to go, if the detectives need to go back and ask additional questions, all that follow-up is done, and then go ahead and release the video. So it may be a difference of today versus 2 or 3 days from now, whatever the case might be. I'm in no way, shape, or form asserting that video should be withheld. It's just a question of when.
Anderson, you know, it's interesting. Whenever we have a police issue, whereas we have a person that's arrested, the police immediately release the identification of that individual and their criminal background. When we have a victim of a crime, we always introduce the identity, with the exception of the victim of a sexual assault or a child. The police are very transparent when it comes to releasing that type of information. However, they become very elusive when it involves an internal situation. And the public has a right to know this information. I worked in the Internal Affairs Bureau. I investigated these police shootings quite frequently, and I genuinely understand what these people's cries for an element of transparency is. Therefore, just get it out. It's eventually going to happen. I respect what the other gentleman mentioned in connection with the investigation, but once again, this is not a constitutionally protected place. The public had a clear line of sight. And let's look at what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for example. Instantaneously, that police department released that video, and we had no community unrest.
Yeah.
Look at the other side of it. The video wasn't released, and now there's an outrage in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Let me just jump in here, because now I just want to explain to our viewers what we're seeing. This is actually now, this is live images, the same location, but a different both cameras are at the same location, different vantage point on it. But this is a different government building, I'm told, that's being protected now by National Guard troops. And you see a larger crowd of people who have gone up to at least stand in front of them, perhaps confront them. Unclear. We're not seeing a lot of back and forth here, but Brian Todd is standing by. Brian, do you know what building that is and what's going on?
I'm told, Anderson, this is the police station. Yes, this is. I can actually see the sign now. They've come up to the police station, the police headquarters here in Charlotte, and they have chanted, "We want the tapes." They've chanted this earlier tonight, "Release the video." Now they're confronting National Guardsmen and police standing in front of the police station, and they're having a conversation with a couple of them here. But they were chanting very loudly, "We want the tapes." Again, this whole dynamic with these two police videos, at least two that we know of, the body cam video and the dash cam video, has really fueled the dynamic with this crowd. I don't know if my photojournalist Mark can pan to his right and show the crowd below me here. Mark is kind of focused there on the confrontation. But, you know, the crowds, again, have been very, very focused on the release of those tapes. They're angry about the tapes not being released. They do not trust the police version of things. And they've just chanted again, "We want the tapes." They're speaking over here. Hold on.
Let's pay respect to the dead. Give a moment of silence for the folks that have lost their life in this movement. Because everybody standing here today is standing on their own 2 feet. Somebody came out here last night and they're not out here now. Let's pay our respect. Let's pay our respect. Fist up. Fist up. Hey, shut up.
Respect.
The brother lost their lives Wednesday.
It's the crowd. They're talking about the person who was killed in the crowd last night, killed not by police, but by another person in that crowd. We learned tonight that that person lost their life. We're going to take a short break. We're going to continue to check in with our correspondents who are out in the crowds tonight. I'll speak also with an eyewitness to what turned out to be the fatal shooting of a protester last night, a witness who tried to help the victim. We'll be right back.